to get bit in the ankle. Mr. Hanson?
Yes, I hope I can have a response to that. First of all, I think that you make a good point that in the past we practiced realpolitik, but I think that is more accountable to the fact that we were in a 50-year Cold War with a totalitarian government in Russia that had butchered 30 million of their people. For example, we gave over almost 400,000 GMC trucks to the Russians to stop fascism, even though that we knew that Stalin had killed millions earlier, and when we saw those trucks used to transport prisoners in the Gulag in the late 40s. So we've done things that were utilitarian at the moment, and that's the way the world is. It's not a perfect place. As far as your other suggestions about backing dictatorships, Saddam Hussein, Osama bin Laden, perhaps we gave some information on intelligence of Saddam Hussein, but we surely did not train Iraqi pilots and take them to Paris like the French did. And as far as Afghanistan goes, we backed a lot of rebels. We didn't know exactly what, how, or when they were transmogrified into what they did. Remember, the United States, for all your pessimism about its role vis-a-vis the Islamic world, saved Muslims in Bosnia, Kosovo, did stop Soviet totalitarianism from taking over Afghanistan, freed Muslim Kuwait, which, by the way, then ethnically cleansed its own Palestinians, and tried to feed people in Muslim Somalia, as well as gives $3 billion a year to Egypt, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority to balance the aid that we give to Israel. So I think that there's a legitimate debate there, but it's not quite accurate to say that we simply back right-wing authoritarians.
Whiteheath, Illinois. Good morning.
Mr. Hanson, I'd like to thank you for your service to our country. It's refreshing to have you on C-SPAN. I just want to state that I am so sick and tired of the verbose rhetoric of the liberal left. We need to wake up in America and realize that we're in a fight for the life of our country and the life of all our citizens, and we must, as a country, learn and love each other, learn to get along, and I'm just so thankful for you being on C-SPAN this morning, and I hope C-SPAN will have you on more often. Thank you, Mr. Hanson.
Thank you. I appreciate it. One comment I'd like to make in response to a couple of the earlier callers is I think that this group on the extreme left does have a problem right now with foreign policy, because in the past years of the 60s generation, for example, they were siding with national liberationists, Marxist, socialist, and utopians. But if you look at the people the United States has opposed with militarily in the last 3 or 4 incidents, Noriega, Milosevic, the Taliban, now Saddam Hussein, these are fascists, and they have killed a lot of their own people. So we have this strange situation now in the left where you might see a sign in a Washington, D.C. park that says, "Bomb Texas, I love Iraq," but right across the corner you'll have people who were butchered by an Iraqi fascist asking for liberation. It's almost as if everything the United States was supposed to do in the 60s, that is, oppose fascism abroad, we're starting to do now at the end of the Cold War, when we're not in this lockstep rivalry with the Soviet Union, yet this Pavlovian anti-Americanism almost doesn't take account of that. So I think we need more emphasis on the fascist nature of the Taliban and Saddam Hussein rather than on the imperfections of the United States.
Canyon Lake, Texas. Good morning.
Good morning. Good show. I think you're right. I think that the people that wouldn't live there are always the ones that saying it's okay for the people that are living there to stay the same. Every time we hear the Democrats asking for proof of Iraq weapons, I believe they finally figured out that maybe Clinton was lying. The communists, socialists, and Nazis, they've got nothing on the Democrats because of their lying, bigotry, and jealousy to divide our country. And I think their division goes along race, age, sex, and income. I can't figure out how they can be so dumb to believe that a dictator madman gets worse because some president somewhere says a few words. And I believe these people are pretty much proving our point this morning, like the professor, where he would flunk a common sense test.
Well, I'm not sure that I find it a little bit more insidious. I don't find the breakdown easily explicable on race, class. My emphasis in the article that you referred to was that there was a particular group of people in the media, in universities, in the arts, novelists, who had a very unrealistic view of events, and that their actions were not compatible with the life that they live. For example, Gore Vidal is very critical of the United States but yet he lives in a villa in Italy that's protected by NATO troops. Italy wouldn't have existed if it hadn't been for NATO. Or a Noam Chomsky who lives in the suburbs of MIT, which a university that's given him tenure and a high salary, yet wouldn't exist without defense contracts. So I think there's a frustration that a lot of our elite critics cannot reconcile the life that they profess for others and the life that they live themselves. I'd like to see more, if you are that angry at the United States and if you are that angry at capitalism, then try to live them in a manner that doesn't reflect those bourgeoisie tastes.
Next is Lansing, Michigan. Good morning.
Good morning. I am a hardworking landscaper in Middle America, and I am not an academician. But after seeing the gentleman this morning, I understand that I need to be in Washington this weekend to protest the voice that is no war, that we should use diplomacy to try to settle this. Thank you very much for C-SPAN. Bye.
Well, I think you're one of the... I think that she's the caller that I was mentioning that's very valuable, a good voice to have in America, that it's the person who has a legitimate difference with the government, is coming to express a protest against the government, wants a redress of grievances, but I don't think that the last caller will have a sign that says, "Bomb Texas, I love Iraq." So there's a little difference between that type of protest, which is necessary and valuable in American society, and the extreme form that expresses a visceral dislike of America.
Oxford, Mississippi.
Oh, yes, Mr. Hanson, I read your book, An Autumn of War, book published by Anchor Books, and I recommend that to any person, any thinking person in the United States. I think that you are the best voice for America. If people would just listen to you, that they would understand so much about the way this country has functioned in the past and the way it is going with this war in Iraq. You are a military historian. You are a classicist. You understand more than anybody else in this country. I've read almost every book on this subject, and you must be heard. And you have to increase your voice, because the people that are out there, they're trying to override the things that you are saying, and these people are wrong, and you, sir, are right.
Thank you. One of the things I think we need to keep in mind is that we shouldn't demand utopian perfection, even though that we have comfortable, leisured lives, and we would like that for the entire globe. The history of mankind is one of fallacy, mistakes, confusion. We try to do the best we can according to our station at this moment, and so then we don't really need to... I think a lot of these elite critics have these unreal expectations about the nature of man, as if Saddam Hussein can be talked to as if he was a colleague in the faculty lounge or the library carrel. The whole beauty of Western culture wasn't that it was perfect or it was morally without blemishes, but simply that it had a system of self-critique, that it involved reason, that it wasn't simply a theocracy, or it was not just a deductive society. It had a mechanism from the Greeks onward that allowed these discussions, and then it would improve or evolve. But somehow we've got these critics who think that because there had been the sins of man in the West, in other words, if all societies in the world had slavery, and the United States had slavery, and then it fought a war where 600,000 people were killed to end it, and it had a conversation, although a late one, then that somehow means that the United States is just like any other country, except the fact is we have slaves all around the world today, in places in China and the Sudan. So I think one of the problems with this elite criticism is they don't take into consideration that the West doesn't claim to be morally perfect. All it claims is that it has a mechanism to have a conversation or a discussion and how to improve itself. It's self-critique, which is, I don't see it in any other tradition.
What responsibilities do you believe the United States has as the only superpower?
It has a lot of responsibilities. It has a responsibility, of course, not to abuse its power. There's never been a time in the history of civilization where one power has had such an inordinate amount of military force, not since the 3rd or 2nd century in Rome. So we have a responsibility to use that force wisely. We also have a responsibility, because we can change things with that force to protect the citizenry. And when you have something like 9/11 and you have a whole country like Afghanistan that was used to kill us and to attack people around the world, and you have a country like Iraq that is the sanctuary for people like Abu Nadal or Abu Abbas, or has gassed its people, or invaded 2 countries and sent missiles into other ones, or violated the armistice, or violated UN sanctions, or tried to assassinate a president of the United States, then that represents a clear and present danger of the United States in the post-9/11 world. We have, I think, a responsibility to take care of it. People keep talking about we don't want to lose lives. We don't, of course. But in the first Gulf War, we lost less than 200 lives. We lost 3,000 in New York. So I think what the President of the United States is trying to do is say, how do we avoid more 9/11s? He looks to the first Gulf War and says that's a risk that is manageable.
Beth, Maine, you're on the air.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for C-SPAN. Mr. Hanson, I'm just a housewife up here in Bath, Maine. But I'm telling you, when I saw Sean Penn on Larry King, I knew he was on the side of the angels. And if for you to say anything against liberals, even though you are a soft-spoken person, I believe this war on Iraq is only for oil. You just look at the cabinet that George Bush has surrounded himself with. I just don't understand why you are attacking people who have the God-given right in this country to say what they feel. I have been a firm believer that Bush, even though he is against affirmative action, would never be president, would never have gone to Harvard, would never have owned a piece of the baseball team in Texas unless he had the Bush name. So is it affirmative action only for the rich? Thank you again for C-SPAN.
Well, there's a lot of issues you raise there. As far as Sean Penn, I think that he should come to the protest march like the earlier caller, but I don't think it's a good idea to go on the eve of war to Iraq, and especially to a fascist country where and talk with a regime. It'd be like talking to the Nazis or the Italian fascists or Japanese militarists that has killed so many of its own people and driven over 1 million of its own people exile. That's where the criticism needs to go to.
Do you feel the same about members of Congress who have traveled?
Yes, I do. I think that was a terrible mistake for members of Congress to go talk to that man. That man is in the same historical category as the great mass murderers of history. And I think that's one of the fault lines we see. I think Jane Fonda made a similar mistake during the Vietnam War when she went to Hanoi and said that the National Liberationists and the Hanoi Communists were not treating prisoners in a way that was torturous, or that Hanoi had been leveled by bomb. None of this was true. So I think there's a legitimate place for criticism, but when you go over the line, when you go to countries that are fascistic or totalitarian, and then you profess from those shores criticism of the United States. That's the point that I wanted to make.
Well, we are out of time. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Victor Davis Hanson, and again, if you'd like to read the entirety of his piece, I've actually been told that I was incorrect. OpinionJournal.com is a free site, so you can find that on the internet, and also nationalreview.com. We'll be back in just a minute.